Hello everybody and welcome to Tanchaz Talk, the world's only English language program focusing primarily on Hungarian folk music. I'm Kalman Magyar Öcsi, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. Episodes of Tanchaz Talk, which combine a mix of music and stories delivered by yours truly, are available as always on tanchaz.com, that's Tanchaz.com, or on YouTube. Just search Tanchaz Talk and subscribe so you don't miss anything. Today's episode, though, is an edition of Tanchaz Talk interviews, where I go in-depth and long-form with a wide range of guests. And today I'm excited to have on the program Kalman Dreisziger joining us via the telephone from Montreal, Canada. Kalman was born in 1945 in Csorna, Hungary. That's northwest Hungary, near the city of Győr, which makes him a Rábaközi boy. He immigrated to Canada in 1956 after the revolution to Welland, Ontario. It's a big Hungarian community there at the time. He joined Kodály dance ensemble of Toronto in 1963 at the age of 18. He ended up leading Kodály as a group's director from 1966 to 1986. That's a 20-year stint, right there during the sweet spot of the development of the Hungarian folk revival movement, including the Tanchaz, and we'll delve into that, I'm sure, for this interview. In the meantime, Kalman got a degree in architecture from the University of Toronto in 1970. He worked as a creative director in advertising mostly, so he's the Hungarian Don Draper, I guess. He was known in his professional career as Cal, and he's the first Kalman that I met that used the name Cal, so that's kind of where I got it from. He relocated to Montreal in 1986, and he's still the heartbeat of the Montreal Hungarian folk dance community with the Bukrita group there. Interesting note, of course, part of Kalman's Hungarian folk dance background is that he met my father as part of the Hungarian Scouts camps when they were growing up, late teens, early 20s, and they together shared a passion for Hungarian folk dance, and they became a dynamic duo in organizing Pontozo and symposiums and North American Hungarian Festival and various tours of touring artists. And Kalman has two sons, Daniel, a former chef and now a personal trainer, and Tanchaz Dreisziger, who I think many of us know and part of the folk dance community here. He's a wonderful former Hungarian professional folk dancer, now leads the Bukrita adult group, and he's an expert in Pilates as well. And it's worth noting that Kalman's brother Nándor is a retired history professor at Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario, and he is also an expert on Hungarian history. I'm very happy to have Kalman on the program. Hello, Kalman.
Hello, Öcsi. It's nice to be on the program.
Thank you. You are the first guest and one of many, many guests, and we're very excited to hear, and I'm very excited to delve into some of the history and some of the future as well with you about the Hungarian folk movement. I was doing some research preparing for the interview, Kalman. Of course, I know a lot about you already, but what I found something about your parents which was surprising, and they growing up in Csorna, your parents were helped out a family, a Jewish family, during the Holocaust, and helping them hide out and then I think escape Hungary during the war and during the Holocaust. Many Hungarians have a similar story, Kalman. I think my wife also has a similar story where her grandparents helped sneak a Jewish family over the border. Your parents were clearly amazing people, and I wanted to know from you, how did they guide your life and your ethos? And I guess what I'm getting at is it merely a coincidence that both you and your brother would make it your life's work to immerse yourself in sharing Hungarian dance and music and Hungarian history?
Oh, that's a big question about how the parents influence, because I have a feeling that none of us really delve into sort of examining how that happens. It sort of happens subliminally when you're smaller. One of the things was that my father was an amateur actor, so theatricals that happened in Chorna he was always involved with. He loved song and dance and theater, so I'm sure that had something to do with my interest in folk dance, which when it happened was the folk dance movement was a theater-centric movement. Állami Népi Együttes, this Hungarian state folk ensemble, whom I had a chance to see in 1953, I believe, in Hungary. They came to Chorna for a performance, an open-air performance. So to me, originally, folk dance was a theatrical phenomenon, and it took a long, long time before being immersed in that, before I realized that, holy crow, it's much more than that. And that was the Tanchaz movement that I had the great good fortune of seeing that in the late 70s when it was already going, and being able to examine my love for Hungarian folk dance in more proper terms. Boy, that's a long statement.
It's a great statement. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, did your parents when they came here? And I saw an interview. I think it's done by a Holocaust Society. I forget the name of it.
Yad Vashem, probably.
Yes, with you translating for them. So did your parents end up not learning English, or they just felt very uncomfortable speaking it?
They felt very uncomfortable speaking it. That's also an interesting family story. When my father came to Canada, he was 50-ish, 50 probably. And as an 11-year-old kid, I learned English quite fast because, kids learn fast. Yeah. And I could never quite understand why my father wasn't able to learn English. He wasn't a stupid man. He was, in fact, very intelligent. And then sort of not understanding that and having that in the background, we moved to Montreal, and I couldn't learn French.
Yes. I know you're such a master translator at all these events. You're kind of my role model. I know my dad would always say, "Kalman, you come here, you translate." And then it's funny to see you always have a translator by your side when you perform in Montreal and when you speak to the audience.
Exactly. I have the great good fortune of being able to translate most of the time with Geneviève Côté. So my salute to her. We make a really good team in announcing stuff.
So 1953 in Chorna, the Hungarian State Folk Ensembles comes there and does a show. What do you remember? I mean, you're like 7 years old, so it might not be much, but do you remember any impressions you had then?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. I'm sure that I was impressed by it altogether as a show, but nothing sticks out. I wasn't aware of dialects or anything like that. And to be honest, the State Folk Ensemble, the Állami, was not big on dialects anyway at that time. Its choreographies were sort of thematic or story choreographies. That was Rabai's forte, is building a choreography around a theme or a story, like Spinning Room or Ácsári Lakodalmas Wedding in Ácsár. No, I don't. There's nothing specific. No, there's nothing like, oh wow, that's so nice. I've got to get closer to that. I was just impressed by it generally.
Yeah, you didn't know the dialects. I doubt they knew the dialects either.
They didn't either. That's right.
So once you came here, you started dancing when you were 18. Now it will be interesting to find. You don't find many young men around that age who start with it, and of course, it started at that age. They're usually quitting by that age. Unfortunately, but why did you start dancing then with Kodai? What got you into it?
I would say two things. One is I had a chance in Toronto. The CNE had the Canadian National Exhibition had a day and a stage performance devoted, a huge outdoor stage performance devoted to a multi-ethnic show called Nation Builders, I believe. And a couple of years before that, so probably in about 61 or 62. Probably 62. Anyway, I saw Kodai perform at Nation Builders at Lakodalmas. And I said to myself, holy crow, that's gorgeous. That's really fantastic. And that was that. And then a year-ish later, two people separately asked me to join the Kodai dance group. It was a school chum, Pintériancsi, on the one hand, and Alec, not Bubby, but the name escapes me now. Anyway, Bubby's sister, also, who was a family friend, and so getting two invitations or two exhortations to join, I went down to a practice and stuck.
Back then, was there the similar issue we have here with there being more women than men usually?
No, it was a pretty even. Okay, a little bit. If you don't mind, I'll delve a little bit into the history of Kodai. Kodai, just to put the context, Kodai was started in 1960, and it started as a male choir. George Zaduban, who was a marvelous, charismatic leader, choir master, excellent musician, expert musician, started the male choir, and the male choir was joined by female voices at some point, and then a dance group. Most of the dancers had danced already in a group called Bihari, Drabik Mishi's group. So it was almost like a complete group went over to become the Kodai group. And so, there was partners in the whole bit. So it wasn't a group that grew out of the community from zero. Most of them had already been dancing in Drabik Mishi's group. So I don't remember it as being a problem between unequal male-female members.
Right. Well, that seems to be a trend that we see at Tanchazes and festivals and the workshops and, of course, dance groups. I don't know if you heard of my proposed company. It's not Amazon, it's Amazoli. I don't know if you heard of that, but you can order a bunch of Hungarian male dancers. They're all called Zoli, and you go on Amazoli.com, and then if you order Prime, you can get free shipping of Zolis. So yeah, and they come next.
Well, oddly enough, we don't need them in Montreal. The Montreal Children's Group has more boys than girls. The Montreal Junior Group has more boys than girls, and the Montreal Adult Group, and this is Bokreta, all of them, Montreal Adult Group has more male members than female members. So I don't know, there's something weird happening in Montreal.
So they need a Amarosi or something.
Yes, wonderful. I
love it. Kalman, do you remember? So when you first joined the group, who was the dance director? And tell me some more about your role models and your mentors that you had back then. And I know I want to keep you to the 60s right now because I know everything changes once we hit the late 70s. But let's talk about when you first joined in.
Okay. There were three people who were teaching the group. Promergyusi, Konstgyuri, and Pokolianikő. Promergyusi was a professional dancer in Hungary. Konstgyuri was, if I'm not mistaken, also danced in the Alami at some point. So he was a professional, and Pukulianiku, I don't know her background, but she was very, very good as well. So these people were the people leading the group, and they had, the knowledge of some of the state folk ensembles choreographies. They had a background in dance. So the group was very fortunate in that respect that it had guidance from professionals who had learned their dancing, who had professional dance background from Hungary still.
So
by the way, the thing that made the original male choir so great is also the fact that we're talking about 1960. There were a lot of people in Toronto who had been part of the amazing choir network in Hungary, or there was a choir culture in Hungary. They would do classical arrangements of folk tunes and stuff like that, and plus Zagban Gyurka's knowledge made that choir a really, really excellent choir. So that was sort of mirrored in the dance group as well, with these people with expertise who had brought expertise from Hungary to the group.
And there was also a live orchestra, correct?
It's kind of a weird thing. Zerban Gyurka, I mentioned, was really an expert musician, so he had the expertise to be able to conduct a concert orchestra. There was no proper Kodai orchestra, but what happened is that Yuri would recruit musicians that he knew from Toronto to make a kind of a quasi-symphony orchestra, and they would play for the big performances that the group did. So
we're talking, Kodai almost became a mini version of the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble. In fact, the dance-wise, the two male dancers you mentioned had both been professional dancers with the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble, or maybe another folk ensemble in Budapest. And you had a choir, and of course the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble had an amazing choir, and they had a live symphonic type of setup as well, correct?
Exactly. In fact, the State Folk Ensemble was the model for Kodai for many, many years. And the repertoire also mirrored that, because Kodai had in its repertoire Acseri Lakodalmas, Este a Fonóban, Kálai Kettős, that sort of thing.
Was that all performed with the permission, so to speak, or the blessing of folks back in Budapest?
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. What happened during those times, the contact with Hungary was very, very guarded because of the political situation. So I don't think anybody asked the State Folk Ensemble whether that was okay or not.
Right. But you became almost like a tribute band or a cover band in a way.
For the State Folk Ensemble, yes, indeed.
Yeah. Why do you and did you love dancing?
That's a really good question, and I can't give you an answer for that. It just happened. I really liked it. I'm not a very athletically oriented person. I never played soccer in a team or anything like that. So I think, glancing back at it, I'm sure that part of the attraction was movement. Most of it was social. But I think the guiding factor in it, or the most important factor in it, was the idea that I was relating to my culture through that, and that was important to me. In teaching kids now, I can almost pick out the ones that have that same attitude and therefore are interested in the dance, as opposed to the ones that are there because their parents sent them.
Right. Well, certainly at the age of 18, your parents would not
They
send
were
you.
not sending me, no.
Yeah, yeah. So you're instead of the soccer team, you were more of like the chess team guy, right?
I did play chess, but not very actively. That's right.
So we in the earlier episode of Tanchaz Talk, I played some of the old Alami music and you remember the Tsigány Tánc,
Oh, yeah.
which was wildly operatic at the beginning. The soprano, oh, just going on, and the band comes in, and then and the music at the end is incredibly theatrical. It's like a Cirque du Soleil show almost. And I'll tell you, Kalman, I still love listening to that today. It's beautiful, beautiful music, and it's a part of our heritage. And I know you to be much more of a purist in terms of how you relate to the village folklore, which is, I know, your major passion. But there's still wonderful, wonderful things and memories tied to that type of music. And I like it when the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble brings back the Kálai Kettős or Ecseri Lakodalmas or something. Even now, although I will say the dancers are actually not really up to the task, are they? It's a different skill set now.
Isn't that interesting? Yes, you're absolutely right. It's interesting to see because it's the flip side of the coin from they weren't up to the Timar style when Timar took over the Alami. Mm-hmm. It was the young kids who just come in like Zura and Batyu who could dance the Timar style properly. The older generation of dancers were sort of going, what? What's that?
Yes. Absolutely. So, Kalman, you started with this stylized, of course, in the 60s, that's what it was. And then the 70s, we see the Hungarian Roots Revival movement really take off, mostly through the Tanchaz movement. Did the Kodály group move uniformly and row into that direction of the Tanchaz type of material, putting that on stage? Or was there any rift internally between people who like to keep the stylized style and people who wanted to leap forward or actually leap back in a way into the village folklore?
That's also a really complicated story as far as I'm concerned. I had a chance. I was in Hungary sometime in the mid to late 70s, and a friend of the family told me to go to the Kasság Club because there was a Tanchaz at the Kasság Club. And I didn't know what a Tanchaz was, but I went to the Kasság Club, and it was absolutely, my jaw dropped. It was absolutely amazing. For one thing, Zura did a solo playing to Halmos Béla's music, in front of Halmos Béla's music playing, and it was just jaw-dropping.
You just gave me chills, Kalman. Thank you. It's there.
So at that point I said to myself, and there were dances from Sake being done, I said to myself, I gotta learn. I just have to learn that stuff. Who am I gonna learn it from? And I talked to a couple of the dancers from the older generation who I knew in the Alami, and they said, oh yeah, we can teach you stuff. We have a choreography that's called Seiki Tancho. And I said, no, I don't want to learn the choreography. I want to learn the dances. And they said, oh well, talk to that kid, and they pointed to Zura. And so that's how it started. But to get back to your question, when I came back, I was hell bent on trying that in that direction. But I knew that Kodály had. Not everybody had that cathartic experience that I had in Hungary. So how am I going to bring them across? Mm-hmm. Now, what had happened, on the other hand, is that there was an amazing musical phenomenon in Toronto called the Fekete Föld, Balségi brothers, who were sort of in the same mode as the Tanchaz movement, in and of their own volition. So not not as influenced by the Tanchaz movement. They wanted to do it on their own. So I went to RP, Dreisziger RP, and said, do you want to do something of this nature? And so we started a Fekete Föld ensemble dancers, partly from Kodály, partly from St. Catherine's kids, and we actually had a show as well at some point, doing, I think in the show was a Seiki choreography, but Tanchaz style choreography. Coincidentally, in brackets, somebody in the audience told me afterwards that stuff must be fun to do. It's really boring to watch.
Yes. Yes.
So, and then once that happened, that gave an impetus to me trying it with Kodály as well. But it was a slow, gradual thing.
Did you have people like, okay, so it's not like one day to the next, Dreisziger Kalman walks in and says, everybody, team meeting, we're done doing Öcsi Lakodalmas, and now we're going to do Madocsai Ugros. Like it wasn't that.
No.
Yeah, it was phased in. So some people did. Like, I'm just curious if there are no names, of course, here, but if there were people who said, I'd rather not, Kalman. I don't like this other stuff. I like to keep my toes pointed and my extend my legs when I slap. Or I like to wear red boots. The girls would say, and I'm not into this improvised kind of stuff. Was there any of that?
Not that I remember, because the dance group was changing in as much as there were new generations of dancers coming in who weren't as connected to the old repertoire as the previous generation might have been. So it was a clean slate for them, so it wasn't too terribly difficult. There were difficulties. My deep respect for Zaduvan Gyurka,
yep.
so I won't hide his name. I asked him at some point whether we could do, if we did a Seiki choreography, would he do the music for it? And he sort of said, oh yeah, of course, I'll clean it up.
Right.
So there was there was that sort of thing a little bit, but not a. I don't remember there being an opposition to moving in that direction.
His head would have spun trying to clean it up, Kalman, because in Seik they only play major chords, so it wouldn't matter if a melody and half the melodies in Seik are in minor keys, but the chords are in major, and there's a Seiki Tanchok. I think what you're talking about, the old Alami Seiki Tanchok.
Oh yeah. I don't know if what I remember very much is the orchestral number,
yes,
the Seiki orchestral number, which is quite. You're right when you're talking about, for example, when you were talking about the gypsy number that the Alami had. Being in a way very engaging and terrific. That music is also incredibly beautiful.
It's beautiful. There's a nice slow part there. Kalman, we kind of in our movement, or in our community here in North America, as an example, we get to know people as folkies. They do this, they play this, they dance that, they dance with this group, but we really lose sense often of their professional lives. Some people are very surprised to know me for 15 years, and then they realize, wait a second, you're a lawyer, like that. So I wanted to touch on your career a bit and how you studied architecture, but then you delved into, or you kind of morphed into creative, or as a creative director in advertising. Can you explain to me how that happened?
Okay, all right. So that explanation would begin with a critique of the teaching of architecture at a university, but it probably applies to a lot of stuff that's career-oriented, like engineering and all that sort of stuff. In architecture, the way that the School of Architecture works is that as a student, you were given problems to solve or projects to do, where you would make all the decisions, design decisions, in bringing in making your idea or your concept flower. When I as an immigrant kid, I was degree oriented and sort of job success oriented, and was a good student. And it was shocking for me to find out when I got out that far from being able to make the major decisions in designing a building, the architect had a very, very limited range of decision-making ability, and most of it was sort of technically oriented. And I was not interested in that, not that I wasn't interested in it at all, but it was such a shock to find out that that's what it was about. When I got out, that I said, no, I can't do this. This is not what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of had a breakdown, and then my wife found a description of a creative guy in an advertising agency hiding out in a storage cabinet and doing his work there, and that was okay in the context of an advertising agency. And I said, well, that looks interesting. So actually, that's cute. Debussy, who was the director of the dance group, who had been the director of the dance group and continued to be a friend even after he left the group, got me a job in an advertising agency, and I wanted to write copy, but I was made into an account person, which was a good training, actually. Mm. So that's how I got into advertising.
So, have you watched Mad Men?
To a very limited extent.
Okay, so when I
was never in mainstream advertising. I was always I was a drug pusher, meaning that I worked in pharmaceutical advertising.
Right. I mentioned Don Draper at the beginning. I hope you knew who that is.
No, I didn't.
Oh, so Don Draper is he's the star of Mad Men, the show, and he's the creative director, and his partner is Roger Sterling, who's kind of like the accounts man. So he's always out and wining and dining the clients, and Don Draper is the guy who's doing making all the ads. So you and this is an interesting kind of confluence here with my father as well, who worked, as you know, in the pharmaceutical industry for years, medical devices as well, in regulatory affairs. So you're doing the advertising and he's doing the regulatory affairs, which is interesting. Kalman, back before work from home and work remotely, we're kind of saddled with limited number of vacation weeks, and that means you got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on your seniority. Of course, that exists now, but a lot of employers allow people to travel and work. I'm wondering whether all going to camps and traveling to Hungary and doing performances and going to Pontozós and all that stuff. Did that ever conflict with your professional career as a creative director in advertising?
I don't remember it conflicting. Sure, there were, for example, at some point, Kodai had the singular distinction of being the Canadian contingent at an international festival in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And it took a little over, probably about 10 days, and I couldn't stay till the end, even though I was leading the group at that point. I had to leave a couple of days early because there were some work pressures. So sure, there were some work pressures, but I don't remember conflicts as such. I don't exactly know how I managed it, but I seem to have managed it. Your father was probably very much in the same vein. There's a phrase in Hungarian, or there was certainly in sort of the late communist times in the 80s or something, and it's főemellékes.
How would you translate that?
That's a good one. What's really important is the secondary.
Yes.
So if you could look at folk dance as a secondary kind of thing,
right.
To me that was always what was really important.
Right. Let me try to maybe challenge you and bring together your creative director and advertising mind with your Hungarian folk dance mind. I know you to be, as I mentioned before, like a philosopher, and really like a purist in my mind. When I think about, when I'm going to put something on stage or maybe make a musical arrangement, sometimes, especially in the old days, it might come across my mind to think, what will Dreisziger Kalman think? Because once the stylized days were over and we went into the village folklore Kalman, you were all in, and 100% in. And I will later ask you about the challenges associated with putting the village folklore on stage, as somebody commented, of course, to you during your first Fekete Föld dance group performance. Nice, looks like fun but tough to watch. So we'll talk about that. But how would you advertise what Tanchaz is to the world? What the core of it, the heart of it? If you can make like an ad or a billboard, what would it say, and how and that would and that would really lead us to to ensure that in the future generations we get to keep this thing with us, this wonderful part of our roots. That's the question.
There was the Smithsonian in Washington had quite a number of years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, had a festival that brought people from Hungary, and they were looking for a key word or a key title for that festival. And my submission for that was Roots Revival. And I think that's a pretty good handle for it.
Was it Roots to Revival or Roots Revival?
Roots Revival.
Somehow it became Roots to Revival. We're talking about 2013, right?
Oh, did it become Roots to Revival? Yeah, it could have. Yes,
yeah.
Easy. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So explain what that means for you.
Well, okay, the roots is fairly easy to see. It's the various village cultures that existed as a network and were greater than the sum of its parts, sort of. In Hungary, up until maybe the First World War, fairly intensely. In Transylvania, probably until the 50s or thereabouts. Even after the First World War in most of Hungary, let's say till the Second World War, but in Transylvania about 50 years longer even. And then the revival aspect of it, that's the roots aspect of it. And the roots aspect of it is really fascinating, really amazing. If you don't mind, I'll launch into my 5-minute version, or even less version of the wisdom that I got from people like Ernő bácsi and Martin Gyurka about European folk dance generally. They say, Hungarian dance experts say, that European folk dance can be roughly divided into 3 ages. The first age being from antiquity until the early Renaissance, and it's dances motivated by community spirit, dances for the large part in circles or chains, everybody doing the same thing. These are the dances that you find still in the Balkans, in the Middle East, stretching into further east a little bit.
Right.
And then the early Renaissance brought, among other amazing changes like perspective in art, brought the possibility of couples dances, not linked anymore. There had always been, interestingly enough, individual dances, male dances, fighting dances and that sort of stuff, but never as couples individually. So that was new. Mm-hmm. Hungary, I think, caught on in Hungary quite fast in about 100 years, which is a blink of an eye in historical terms. I've always wondered why. One of the things that I think you can say is our Renaissance king, Mátyás király, had a northern Italian queen, and she brought with her probably artists from northern Italy, but possibly also dance masters who would have taught this style of dancing. Anyway, in the Carpathian Basin, that became the ruling style. Because as couples, then you could improvise. You weren't constrained by the community anymore. Mm-hmm. So it was a revolution of individuals as well as. And that also speaks to perspective and all the individual point of view and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the third phase of it is a restructuring of dance into set pattern dances, courtly dances. These are the ones that made their way into the New World in North America as well. Square dances devolved from that tradition, but this is the tradition in Western Europe. Dance tradition in Western Europe. One of the reasons why geographically there's this huge divide between the Balkans, Greece, and the Carpathian Basin, and then Western Europe, it has to do with the growth of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had gobbled up the Balkans by the time the revolution in the early Renaissance happened in dance. So it impacted Central Europe, Hungary, but not the Balkans anymore. And then by the time this next revolution came along, the restructuring, the Ottoman Empire had spread to the gates of Vienna, so that revolution didn't impact Hungary anymore. So that's why Central Europe, Hungary, Slovakia, Transylvania, Romanian traditions are mainly set in this, not exclusively by any means, because we have Karikazo and all that, which belongs to the older layer of dances, but mainly in the early Renaissance tradition, whereas the rest of Western Europe is in the late Renaissance tradition. So
Kalman,
where was I going with all of that?
No, this is good, very interesting, because we a recent episode of Tanchaz Talk, I talked about the three ethnographic regions as taught by Martin György, Dunántúli region, and then Tisza region, and then Erdély, Transylvania. Those are the big three, and of course, that analysis was done 40, 50, 60 years ago. We know a bit more now. In fact, in terms of it stretches out even beyond that into Bukovina and the like. Although that's a whole different philosophical discussion. But I really appreciate you bringing this into for the dancers in the audience, the three ages, the antiquity, the antiquity of line dances, we'd see that, of course, as an example would be the Gyimesi Hésa, correct?
That's right, because curiously enough, Gyimesi has both traditions, both that antiquity tradition, probably principally from Romanian sources, and the Hungarian the Renaissance tradition in the couples dances, right. And a little bit, even a little bit in the structured dances in kettős jártatója, sírülője,
Absolutely.
jártatója anyway.
Absolutely. We're very lucky to have, for instance, that region exemplify all three. That's interesting. I appreciate that. By the way, you mentioned Ernő bácsi. You mean Pessovar Ernő, is that correct?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay. So getting back to the roots to revival statement that you kind of came up with as a tagline, which either it was roots revival and somebody changed it to roots to revival, or you actually had proposed roots to revival, but it was 10 years ago almost now. So, and that was a fantastic festival by Smithsonian, and a lot of very, very notable people and dancers were here, and that was fantastic. So getting back to that, you see a lot of discussion, philosophical discussion about the traditionalists. And here's an example, Vizeli Balázs, a great violinist, who is very against the business of Hungarian folk music. He says Hungarian folk music is not a business, and if we're going to make a living doing this, we should just look to teach and maybe sell some recordings, but forget about the commercialization of it, which is one aspect. And then the other aspect you have, it's an example, the Cheek band, which plays into the pop culture purposefully, can totally play a tanzas if they wanted to, and they do sometimes, rarely, but they purposefully play into the pop culture, and of course there's a financial reason for it. People have to make a living and feed their families, but also there's a potential way there to shoehorn the roots, then the revival, into something, maybe a third category, like could be the future, or ensuring the survival in pop culture. And I mentioned this the other day. We did a recent episode of Tanchaz Talk and I was talking about how the Serbians or the Albanians would know these folk pop artists a lot. The average Joe would know that person on the streets of Belgrade or Tirana, but they don't really know their folklore. So meanwhile, we're very lucky because we have these people. People wouldn't know Vizeli Balázs on the street, but damn, he's one of the greatest violinists, Hungarian folk violinists that exists. But he's relatively unknown among Hungarians on the street. So the question for you is there a way to do this tastefully, or do we just keep in terms of cementing the revival into future generations, or do we just keep doing what we're doing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. That's really an interesting question, and I have a feeling that I'm less. Philosophically speaking, I'm less of a purist than I used to be. I really enjoy Cigliani when he's, say, for example, playing with Rocka Jam.
Right.
So I can't say that I'm a purist from the point of view of throwing that away, but I do sympathize with Vizeli Balázs's point of view, is that it shouldn't be commercial. Shouldn't be primarily and principally commercial, because I think the minute that money and fame become the desired outcome, you lose then you lose your guiding principles.
Mm-hmm. Well, is the solution then, Kalman, that everybody who kind of wants to do this should probably get a day job, so to speak, a creative director, an advertising agency, or a lawyer in a law firm, or a regulatory affairs director at a pharmaceutical company? Is that so you can pay for the cost of your passion, or is there some kind of middle ground to make some money doing it? That's more of a complicated question, but I don't know the answer to that.
And I don't either. It seems to me now that I'm thinking about it as you're talking about it, that you're at a different point from where I was at when I was very actively involved in this. When I was very actively involved in this, there was no question that I could make a living doing that. Absolutely no question. So it went without saying that I needed a day job. And so now I'm getting a glimpse of the fact that you're saying that maybe you'd like to do this full time and you'd like to make a living at it. Or let's say someone might want to do that. And I, not having had that, posed that question to myself, I have no answer.
Oh, I'm not, by the way, I'm not suggesting that I would do it. And I don't want to do it. I'm actually as equally passionate about being a lawyer as I am about this Tanchaz Talk, so, but you're right, there are people, and, your son is an example, Daniel, who, a Danish who went with his wife, they went to Slovakia and they danced for a professional folk dance group, Eletfa, for a couple of years, to do that. That's something they couldn't have done here.
Actually, no. He was a professional dancer here. He danced in Sortilège, which was Quebec's only sort of semi-professional professional company.
That's true. That's true. And I will say the Hungarian government is doing a good job with the funding, and they don't make it easy, I understand, but there is funding out there for musicians to get grants. They have to be, they have to work for it. They have to write for it. They have to be smart about it. But they can get money, and I like that. And a lot of criticism can be and have been made about the Fidesz government. But that's one of the things that they're really pushing is the folklore. Of course, they're pushing sports maybe much more, but that's a separate topic. Yeah. So Kalman, let's talk about the dance flip side of this. So we're talking about putting, commercializing, and let's not talk about that anymore. Let's talk about putting it on stage. How about that? That's a term that we can use. Going back to your Kodai days, it's early '80s, and you're back from your Koshak Club experience, seeing Jura break his shoes apart doing the Seiki Shudu in front of Halmos Béla, good times, and you bring that spirit home here. And I remember from the early '80s, I was a young child, but I remember watching Kodai starting to do new choreographies, the bogey, of course, the classic big choreography, that's Jura choreography. When you choreographed for Kodai and for Bokreto afterwards, what do you think about in terms of how to bring the village dancing onto the stage in the most tasteful yet entertaining manner possible?
Let me backtrack a little in that sense. When all that started, a little bit of history. In around, I believe it was 1979, your father started the idea of a Puntazo festival, and I was along with him on that. The idea originally was going to be that there would, every other year, there would be regional Puntazo festivals, and I took it on myself to do the one in Toronto, but there was going to be one around New York, New Jersey, maybe around Cleveland, maybe in California, and some of that actually happened. And then every second year there'd be a Csúcs Puntazo, a festival that brought out the winners of the regional festivals together. Well, that never really happened, I don't think, but the Toronto Regional Festival took off. So the first one, but before that it took off, the first one was in Toronto, and South Ontario groups came, but also Mackinac from Drummondville came, and Capistrán Ensemble from Winnipeg came, and these two ensembles, Capistrán and Winnipeg. Oh, by the way, I said to Kodai, we're not going to take part in this because we don't want to discourage the regional little groups by being so much better than they are. That seemed it turned out to be a pretty stupid statement because Mackinac was far better than Kodai would have been.
Yeah.
So next time around, when the next Pontozo was sort of in preparation, I was sort of beating my head saying, well, if we invite Mackinac again, what do we do that is at least at the same level as they're doing? And at that time, my wife said, you know what, why don't you invite Jura out and have him do something? And that seemed like a good idea. Mm-hmm. So we invited Jura out, and I don't think there was ever, the first, I forget what happened at Pontozo, but that was a sort of a seminal thing for Kodai to work with Jura. And the first time that Jura and Hushi Németh Ildikó were out together, they did a choreography based on Satmar material for Kodai, which was a fabulous choreography, and the group absolutely loved it, and it enriched the group and made it more attractive in the whole bit. So we couldn't do it without Jura, and we kept bringing them out, Jura and Hushi. And so that's a long way of answering that. What did I do as far as choreographies were concerned? I think to a large extent I was trying to imitate the kind of choreographic idea that Jura had. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit different now because it's been a long time, and I'm not as closely connected to that. What I do is I look at original videos. I look at village groups. Like if I'm doing a Rabakosi choreography, which I was doing end of last season, there was no end of last season. Beginning of last season with the Bokrita Juniors. I look at the Sunny group, what they do on stage. I look at the Vitnyedi group, and there's a lot of material floating around on YouTube and in various places that you can look at and say, that's an idea for a choreography, as long as you keep in mind the basic vocabulary. And,
but the interesting comment, those are revival groups, like they're right there. Are we talking about like the older people that they sometimes bus over to the Tanchaz Talk and we see them the 60, 70-year-olds dancing, or are we talking about young revival groups, for instance Yashag to Yaspering?
If we're talking about Rabakers, I'm talking about the Sunny group, and I'm talking about videos where some of the old gentlemen, fabulous old guys, Santes Varga, and people like that are still dancing in the group. So yeah, I like it when it's not purely revival, but that it has some of the original stuff. Even though the original stuff in Hungary to a certain extent is already tainted with the Gyöngyös Bokrita movement staged aspect of it, but hey, so who cares? It's still the original stuff.
Right. So let me just ask you two follow-ups. The year that Jura first came, you mentioned he did a fantastic choreography. Do you remember the year? Is this the 80, 81, 82-ish?
80 or 81, I don't remember exactly.
Okay. And Németh Ildikó, or Hús, you mentioned that's his former wife. Just so everybody knows who Kalman was talking about. And then when you mentioned the Gyöngyös Bokrita movement, can you just tell the people what that is?
In the 1930s, I was extending into the early, let's say 1930s mainly. There was a newspaperman and promoter called Béla Paulini in Hungary who came up with this idea of bringing village groups up to Budapest for a festival. And that festival got to be so popular and so famous that was the Gyöngyös Bokrita. He called the festival the Gyöngyös Bokrita, and it got to be so famous, and it had a huge effect on villages that still had a live folk culture, who then wanted to take part in it. So lots of individual village groups sort of trained themselves to become to go up on stage and show their own folklore. The people who would do the staging of these were usually the local teacher or a local dignitary, and depending on how good they were at what they did, they were able to put the genuine article on stage pretty directly, or they muddled with it and sort of changed it and put it on stage that way. But in either case, it had most of it had the genuineness, the authenticity of the original folklore roots.
So why didn't that mentality of let's take the village folklore, let's take the villagers themselves, and let's fiddle with it a bit and make it a little more palatable, a little more elegant for the stage, but let's keep that core. You're not going to teach a 57-year-old guy from Sun to point his toes, right? And and the ladies are not going to wear the red boots and do the quick spinning that you would see the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble do. Why didn't that ever catch on in Budapest, and that we could have almost gotten to what happened in the Tanchaz movement in the 1970s and the 80s faster? What happened there?
I'm speculating. One aspect of it could be that the war intervened, the Second World War, and it put an end to that festival, and then the subversion of Hungarian government by the Communist Party and turning it into a communist dictatorship happened, and that was also inimical to this thing going on. Although the communists always had always claimed to have a folk-oriented thing, but their folk-oriented thing was Moiseyev was the model, and that was far from Gyöngyös Bokréta. So that was one aspect of why it didn't, and the other aspect, which I think is more important, is that Gyöngyös Bokréta was never a participatory thing. It was always a stage thing.
Right.
It was participatory as far as the individual village groups were concerned, but you couldn't. It was never opened up to everybody, and there was nobody around to lead the idea that this could be something that could be learned, unlike it happened in the 70s with Martin Gyurka, Timar, and people like that who said, this is something that could and should be made available to everybody.
I think Moiseyev, the model of imitating Moiseyev, is probably probably the core reason, and Ecseri Lakodalmas, for instance, and the Cigány Tánc we talked about, etc., as the closest thing to imitating Moiseyev, that Hungarians could come to, and I'll say, I love watching Moiseyev. Loved them in the '80s. Saw them at Metropolitan Opera House. They were on tour. Blown away at the level and the choreography, the hopak, and the Cossack dances and all that stuff, and the sailor dance. And you remember all that stuff, Kalman. You probably didn't like it at all.
At the time, I liked it.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well,
but that was sort of back before the 70s. That was back in the 60s.
You see, I saw him in the 80s, so I already knew what folklore was, but I loved it, and we did a lot of that type of stuff in the Tamburitsins, as you know. But now that I look at Moiseyev, and every time they say, here's Moiseyev doing a Greek dance or a Hungarian dance, oh my God, it is.
Which they did. They did the Pontazo.
Yeah, it's disgusting. Sorry.
And Zsiga Bácsi's take on it was, they came in looking like ghosts. What is this? Because that was his dance.
Yeah.
And he really resented it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's as President south of the border would say, collusion with the Russians, right?
Yes, exactly.
just for those listening who don't know, we mentioned Timar Sándor a few times. Timar Sándor was the director of the Hungarian State Folk Ensemble during the 80s, and he was really the first one to bring about or to put on stage these village dances, and you know the and you know it was gradual over time for 4, 5, 6 year period. And he had wonderful dancers who had already gone to the Tanchazes, Jura being one of them, Batyu and others, and who later, and you know, Jura and Batyu quickly, by the late 80s, said, you know what, we're going to do our own thing. And they did the Kodai ensemble, which I don't know if it bothered you guys at the time, but you know, because
not at all. We took it as at least I did as wow, that's great, that's lovely.
Yeah, we don't have. I haven't looked in a while on YouTube, but it'll be great to see if any of those old Kodai. Of course, that was probably truly the greatest generation in terms of the first generation of choreography that we saw. You know, 1987, 88, 89 with Kodai, and then Jura then became the master of the next generation, which I include Fitos Dezső really as my favorite in that generation. So we can talk much more about that. Kalman, this is gonna probably be an 18-part interview over the next few weeks. But you mentioned the Pontozo, and you know, I wanted to ask the notion of a contest. And you know, somebody very wise, I forget who it was, said, you know, contests or, you know, races are for horses, okay, not for folk dancers. And you know, and I often reflect on the fact that Pontozo was initially a festival that was first place, second place, third place, honorable mention, etc. It was a contest, and then we stopped doing it. I think we were all Kalman at that point. I was old enough and a part of the conversation. You know what? It's not. We shouldn't do a contest. Let's just do a festival, and it became more of a festival.
You're absolutely right. The contest aspect of it, when we first did it, I mentioned that the outstanding groups then were Kapistran from Winnipeg and from Drummondville, the Mackinac Ensemble. There was such a huge problem because we had to give our first place and all that sort of stuff. And then I don't know whether the next time or the time after we just made it a festival, which was such a good decision not to have it be competitive, right?
These were the epic contests between Toronto Kodai and New York Hungaria, where I danced. Kalman, we reinvigorated though the Pontozo as a contest a couple of years ago, and Kodai here in Toronto has taken the lead on doing that, and it was canceled this year because of COVID. But I have a different aspect of it or a different thought on it now, and I wanted to run it by you and see what you thought. You know, there is we have enough festivals. We have Toborzo in New Jersey. There are many other festivals and camps and the like. The buzz around Pontozo does create a certain atmosphere of excitement, and I see it in your kids too that participate coming from Montreal. You know, there's a place for it, I think, and it might work now. What do you think? You know, the contest part is back.
Yes, I do know the contest part is back. And I can't decide. I'm of two minds. One is exactly like you say, that it does give a certain amount of excitement, who's going to win and all that sort of stuff. And then the other part of it is that if there's winners, there's also losers, and you don't want that. On the whole, overall, I'd still be for festival rather than contest.
Yeah, on the whole, I'm with you, and I'm waffling on it a bit. I play on the side the whole time, and I see the excitement. I do see some heartache, some disappointment on not getting first place. The judges, of course, we always have someone from Hungary there. They do a wonderful job soothing everybody and calming everybody down. And they're trying to change formats. I know Kodai is working on that as well to make it more palatable as well to watch, because it's a very long day, and you can imagine on the violinist, it's a lot of work. But anyway, Kalman, you've written a whole bunch articles and and obviously read a lot. What kind of reading do you recommend for people, hopefully in English, to get a real robust background on Hungarian folk dance and music? What are your kind of recommended readings on that subject?
Oh my goodness, there's because I do read Hungarian, I'm not really familiar with what exists in English.
Okay.
Oy, oy, oy.
So you mentioned Martin György, and Martin György's book, Types and Dialects, which also has an alternate name. It's called, I think, Hungarian Folk Dances. I've seen it in two. I have both versions. They're available in English.
Oh, for me, that's the Bible.
Okay.
That's the starting point. Absolutely.
Okay.
Martin György is amazing. He's an amazing man. He was an amazing man.
Yeah.
I had the great good fortune to be able to meet him while he was still alive. He died at 53 of old age. He'd worked himself to death.
Yes. Well, managing the Beatles was a full-time job. I'm just kidding. There's George Martin.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Was that a George Martin? Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah. But this is Martin George Martin. Kalman, if after the interview you think of any English document readings, then I think you should send them along to me, and I'll get them out to the universe here. It could, and I encourage people of any generation, but more of older generations, to do what I'm doing right now, which is to write a book of their own experiences in whatever format they might think. Kalman, maybe it's something, a good retirement pet project for you to consider. Bringing a newer light or a fresher light on Martin György's work in English. I'll challenge you on that.
Well, I am doing a little bit of a project with the embassy in Montreal, Hungarian embassy in Ottawa, and that is to sort of cover the types and regions of Hungarian folk dance in short sort of
like blog entries almost, right?
Yeah, that's right. Always with a video and a little bit of a write-up, and I'm almost at the end of that. I've got maybe two. The next one, the second last one is Kalman Dreisziger, and maybe the last one is going to be about the great Hungarian folk dance researchers. But we went through all the types of dance, what we talked about in terms of historical layers, and then the large regions, Dunantul, Tisza, and Transylvania, and within that, the examples of the sub-regions. So that sort of exists, and I was getting a little bit of a suggestion or a nudge from the folks at the embassy that maybe that should be turned into a printed version as well. The problem I'm having is that I rely so heavily on the material from Hungary, from Adner Bácsi's stuff, from Felföldi Laci's book, that it's like an edit of their stuff.
Right.
But I mean, what are you going to do? I don't want to make the stuff up. I have to source it from somewhere. So we'll see. We'll see whether something comes up.
Where can we find that online? I see on Facebook sometimes it's released, but is there any website?
Generally, when I don't know if it exists as a series with the embassy. I should ask.
Okay.
I'll find out and I'll let you know.
Hungarian Folk Dance in Canada is a group that Kalman started, was it a couple of years ago now?
Yeah, that's right.
Hungarian Folk Dance in Canada. And even if you're not in Canada, there's good resources there, and it's not just for Canadians, right, Kalman? Anybody can try to join.
Right.
Okay.
Right, exactly. Oh, yeah.
But no politics and no BS.
No commercials.
No commercials. So don't try to peddle your paprika on there. And the administrator will let you in. And I've seen those articles posted on there. So that's Hungarian folk dance in Canada. Kalman, what else? You're a super smart guy. You've always been. What do you read and watch? Give us some recommendations. Doesn't have to be folklore, but a recent book you wrote that you'd like to recommend to your old friend Öcsi here.
Okay, there's one thing I'll recommend, which I don't know how you're going to access it, but I have it in printed version. And it's an article that I wrote in 1993 called Hungarian Community Folk Dance Groups in Canada. Because what I did in a year earlier, in 93 or 92, I forget, is I sent out a questionnaire to the administrators of all the folk dance groups, all the 24 folk dance groups in Canada, from coast to coast, and they all answered. And I was able to put together a study of what are they doing, how large are they, what's their repertoire, what about costuming, what problems do they have, and all that sort of stuff. So that article might interest you.
Yes, thank you. I will check that. I remember being surveyed for it. Well, maybe I don't remember it, but it was a long time ago, of course. But I know that came about 24 folk dance groups in Canada, and of course we also know now there's about 6 to 10 bands, depending on how you count them. So we definitely have a robust group here. We'll leave for another episode the challenge of how to bridge the gap between Western Canadian and Eastern Canadian Hungarian folk dance groups and festivals, and there's we're really just just scratching the surface in terms of the discussion with Kalman. You could all hear how smart and resourceful and knowledgeable he is, not just about our community, but about Hungarian folklore in general. What's your proudest accomplishment, Kalman, that you had a part of in your first, I'm going to say 75 years on the earth here, with respect to our community, the Tanchaz community? And what more do you feel that you would like to accomplish or see accomplished? So looking back and also looking forward.
Okay, not necessarily the most, but one of the things that I'm proudest is in the late 80s, or let's say that as a general date. Being able to be instrumental in an amazing flowering of folk dance in Ontario. In Ontario at that point, there were folk dance groups in Windsor, London, Kitchener, Delhi, Brantford, Hamilton, Toronto, Oshawa, Kingston even, a zither group in Sudbury, and of course Ottawa. So it was an amazing time, and these groups would come to Pontozo year after year after year with new material, new costumes. It was absolutely amazing, just amazing. And I had a largish hand in that. I missed St. Catharines and Welland and Niagara Falls because I was teaching off and on mostly in St. Catharines, sometimes in Niagara Falls, 2 times in Welland. I was teaching regularly in Windsor, sometimes in London, Ontario, in the Tobacco District, Delhi. So I thought, in retrospect, that was a pretty amazing time and an amazing movement, so to speak.
Right. The number of groups, of course, have substantially shrunk, and as have the Hungarian communities. There's a lot of good reason for that, to be honest. It's not like, gone are those days, those are the good days. No, there's different days, right?
Yeah, good demographic reasons, yes.
Yes. We appreciate all that work that you did back then, Kalman. and I know it was very it was regional, as you explain it. Most of these places that Kalman just mentioned, like they're pretty much like an hour and a half drive, depending on traffic on the 401 from Toronto. So.
Like 4 hours to Windsor.
So more. Yeah, there's ones that are farther, of course, but that's a big deal to go back and forth locally, and we're lucky now. We don't have that trekking traveling teacher really anymore. The Körösi Csoma program, for instance, helps solve some of that problems for us in terms of putting people in the right places to teach or to help with the community. Another topic for another episode, of course. What more do you want to see? It might be nothing. You might be very happy with the status quo, Kalman, but I started this program as a part of the kind of the COVID lockdown, and then I realize this is something that I would like to continue doing until people will listen, and until I can. I think there's a lot of memories to record and people to interview and music to play and stories to tell, not just going back but into the future. What more would you like to see accomplished or done in furtherance of Tanchaz and the Roots revival?
Okay, you mentioned the Körösi program, KCP program, and my problem with the KCP program, which I agree is a fabulous thing, and it did great good in terms of folk dance groups around North America and probably all over the world. But my take on it is that these KCP people do wonderful things and then they go home, and then what? Mm-hmm. So my desire would be, and I'm not going to do this, but I wish somebody would do this, would be to start a serious training program for local instructors throughout Canada, maybe Canada and the States, so that people who are sort of in charge of dance groups, who have some expertise but are always in need of new material and improved technique for leading a group, would have that possibility to progress.
That's a great idea. I don't know. I have a running list of potential guests for the show, and I just added a name that you know and I know, Levoy Péter. Péter Levoy has been proposing the potential for like an accreditation or a certification of teachers, some kind of objective thing, that training that can be done, that's uniform, which is an interesting proposal.
My only problem with that is that the minute it gets accredited and formalized and whatever, you kind of lose me. I like informal, more work and results oriented than oversight and accreditation oriented.
Yeah.
So that would be my.
I get it. Yeah, I could see both ways having merit, or both schools of thought having merit. Kalman, I really appreciate the time that you devoted to being the first guest here, and I definitely would like to have you back.
And so far the best, right?
So far, yeah, the first and the best. So I have some music playing in the background, and with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Do you have any parting last words of wisdom for the people out there?
Dance. Play music.
Dance and play music. That's from one of the great creative directors in advertising the pharmaceutical world has ever known. Kalman, thanks again once again for coming on. And
thank you, Öcsi. Thank you very much.
On behalf of Kalman Dreisziger and myself, Kalman Magyar Öcsi, thank you for listening to Tanchaz Talk, and tune in next time.